There are so many reasons to get the truth about 9/11 revealed, and you know all these, I won't go through them, but one more is simply to keep it from happening again. Now, you know, after JFK, many people who were trying to get the truth out said, you know, if we don't get it exposed, they'll be emboldened, they'll do it again. And sure enough, Martin, Bobby, and then 9/11. And of course, before that, we had the original Pearl Harbor, and they got away with that too. Now, of course, that's the good terrorist event, because that was the good war, and we may not like to think about it, but that one also was an inside job. And so this is, you know, this is non-denominational. Republicans and Democrats have participated in these events. If we do get a real investigation or a trial, there is simply no doubt about what the verdict will be, because now, well, I began the book Debunking 9/11, debunking with the statement, the evidence that 9/11 is an inside job is now overwhelming, and the only task is to get people to look at the evidence. Well, in the meantime, the evidence has gotten stronger yet, and so in my new book there is a lot more evidence. So let me give you a little example, a few examples of this. One is, we all know about Barbara Olson's famous phone call from Flight 77, in which she called Ted and the Solicitor General and said she had been hijacked, and the hijackers had put all the passengers and the pilots in the back of the plane. And of course, this was a pretty strange scenario. Here you had about 60 people, including the two pilots, one of whom was a champion boxer, being held off by three small guys with knives and box cutters. So it was an implausible story anyway. But to give you some idea how important this story was for getting the public myth, we all know that the hijackers had box cutters, right? It was only Barbara Olson's alleged call in which box cutters were mentioned. This was one of the ones that really got the so-called war on terror started. People just ready to go kill Muslims because sweet Barbara Olson had been murdered by these Muslims. 2006, the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, the FBI turned in a report on phone calls from all the flights. When they got to Flight 77, they did mention Barbara Olson. They said, now Ted had said there were two calls, about a minute each. The FBI said one call attempted, unconnected, it lasted 0 seconds. So this is pretty astounding. The FBI is part of the Department of Justice, and yet it has said that the story told by the former Solicitor General of the Department of Justice is false. Didn't happen. And of course we got screaming headlines in the New York Times and the Washington Post revealing this story. What about the other stories about people making phone calls saying there are hijackers on the plane? Flight 93 was the big one for cell phone calls. More cell phone calls from Flight 93 than from all the other planes put together. About 13 calls were clearly indicated as being cell phone calls. Now, of course, we had debates, can you make cell phone calls from high altitude airliners? Most of the evidence suggests about 1,000 feet is the maximum for this, and the flight was up to 30 to over 40,000 feet. Popular mechanics debated disputed this and said, 40,000 feet, no problem. At about the same time, the FBI was turning in this report to the Moussaoui trial, and what did it say? Flight 93, 37 calls, 35 from seatback phones, 2 from cell phones, both at 9:58 when the plane was down to 5,000 feet. Now that's still a little high, but at least it's arguable they'd be possible. So the FBI allowed these, all these hundreds of, literally thousands of stories around the world about these cell phone calls, and let the public believe this, and then very silently says, didn't happen. Now, what does this mean? Well, you could just say, well, all these people were mistaken. They just thought their relatives said, I'm calling you on a cell phone. Or they misremembered. Except Dina Burnett. She said, I knew it was Tom calling me because I looked on my caller ID and I saw his cell phone number on all 3 or 4 calls. So here again, very strong evidence that these calls are fabricated, and there is technology to voice morph and also to fake the number. My favorite story, Muhammad Atta gets to Boston on September 10th. I mean, he's already there. He rents a car, and he and a buddy go up to Portland, Maine, stay overnight, have to get up very early the next morning, catch a commuter flight back to Boston in time to catch flight 11. Of course, Otto was going to be the hijacking pilot, and also he was the ringleader of the whole operation. So it's very important that he got there. Why would have he done such a thing? We all know commuter flights are quite often late. If that flight had been 45 minutes late, they would have had to call off this whole operation they had allegedly been planning for 2 years. So it was a big mystery. The 9/11 Commission and the FBI says, we have no idea why Atta would have done this, but he did. You know, we've got photographs and so on that show that Atta was there in Portland and so on. If you go back to the stories, well, there was another mystery. Why didn't his luggage make the flight? Now, it was a good thing it didn't, because after the planes hit the tower, somebody looks in the airport there, and there's Muhammad Atta's luggage. So they look in, and they find all this incriminating evidence. Directions how to fly, Boeing airplanes, and a Quran, and a will saying he's looking forward to being a martyr and going to heaven and all that. So, but it was still a mystery. Why didn't the luggage make the flight? They had a full hour. Everybody else's luggage made the flight. Why not Atta's? Well, if you go back to September 12th and see what all the newspapers and TV channels were telling you, a very different story. See, according to the story we've been told, Atta and Al-Omari rented a blue Nissan, drove up to Portland, left it in the airport there the next morning, flew back. But on September 12th, if you read the newspapers, you'll see Atta had left this treasure trove of information in a white Mitsubishi in the Boston Logan Airport. He packed twice. Defense attorney, eh? And a couple other guys named Bukhari had taken the blue Nissan up to Portland, stayed overnight, and then took the commuter flight back. But then by Wednesday, they found a problem. Bukharis hadn't died on 9/11. One was still alive, and the other one had died a year before. So they just changed the story. Because everybody knew about this story about the guys taking the Nissan up to Portland. They just changed it and said, Atta did it, and the story about the white Mitsubishi just disappears. So here you see, they're just making it up.